You've probably heard this one. Put a marshmallow in front of a 4-year-old, tell them if they can wait 15 minutes without eating it, they get a second one, then walk out of the room. Some kids grabbed it in seconds, others held out, fidgeting, sitting on their hands, staring at the ceiling. And decades later, when researchers tracked those same kids down as adults, the ones who waited turned out to have better SAT scores, healthier body weight, and more success in life overall. For 50 years, that's been taught as proof that willpower in early childhood predicts your entire future. Delay gratification as a toddler, and you're set up to win at life. Grab the marshmallow, and you're apparently doomed to struggle. Except a much bigger, much more careful replication of this study found something the original researchers never controlled for, and once you account for it, the famous marshmallow effect nearly disappears. Stick around, because the real explanation has nothing to do with willpower, and it changes how you should think about self-control entirely. Let's start with the legend, because it really is one of the most famous studies in psychology. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a Stanford psychologist named Walter Mischel ran a series of experiments on children at Stanford's own on-campus preschool. Each child was left alone in a room with a single marshmallow and a simple choice: eat it now or wait for the researcher to come back and get two. Years later, Mischel and his colleagues followed up with the same kids as teenagers and adults, and the kids who'd waited longer as 4-year-olds tended to score higher on their SATs, tended to have lower body mass index, tended to be rated by their parents as more capable and better adjusted. The conclusion became one of the most cited findings in developmental psychology. Self-control, measured in a single moment at age 4, seemed to predict decades of life outcomes. It got folded into parenting books, self-help books, school curricula built entirely around teaching kids grit and delayed gratification, all resting on the idea that willpower is a stable trait you either have or you don't. Here's the first crack. The original Marshmallow study had a little over 90 kids in it, and all of them came from the same place, the Stanford Preschool, a program serving mostly the children of Stanford faculty, grad students, and staff. Not a random sample of American kids, a small, wealthy, highly educated slice of one university community. In 2018, a team of researchers led by Tyler Watts set out to redo the marshmallow test properly. Same basic setup, same task, same follow-up years later, but with over 900 kids, a sample that actually reflected the real diversity of American family incomes and backgrounds. And when they ran the numbers the same way Mischel originally did, they found a much weaker link between waiting for the marshmallow and later success than the original study had claimed. But here's the part that actually explains everything. When Watts' team statistically controlled for one thing, the family's socioeconomic background, things like household income and the mother's education level, the connection between marshmallow waiting and later achievement almost completely vanished. For kids from wealthier, more stable households, whether they waited for the marshmallow barely predicted anything about their future at all, which means the original study was never really measuring willpower in isolation. It was measuring willpower entangled with everything that comes with growing up in a stable, resourced environment. And the tiny, homogeneous Stanford sample simply didn't have enough variation in that background to reveal it. So does that mean the marshmallow test is fake? No, and this is the part worth sitting with. Kids really do vary in how long they can delay gratification, and that variation is real and measurable. The effect isn't fabricated. What's wrong is the story wrapped around it, the idea that this one moment reveals a fixed, isolated character trait that explains your whole future, independent of the environment you grew up in. So what's actually driving whether a kid waits for the second marshmallow? Researchers point to something a lot more logical than raw willpower. It comes down to trust and to the actual odds a kid has learned to expect. A child who's grown up in a stable environment where adults reliably follow through on promises has learned that waiting usually pays off. Delaying gratification is the rational move because experience has taught them the second marshmallow is actually coming. A child who's grown up in a less predictable environment where promised things don't always materialize has learned something completely different and completely reasonable given their circumstances. Take the guaranteed reward now because waiting for a bigger one later carries real risk of getting nothing at all. That's not a willpower deficit. That's an adaptive strategy calibrated to a child's actual lived experience of whether the world keeps its promises, which gives us a genuinely more useful takeaway than the original myth. The lesson isn't that some kids are just born with more grit than others, a story that quietly blames children for circumstances they didn't choose. The real finding is that self-control isn't a fixed trait sitting inside a child waiting to be unlocked. It's a response to environment, and specifically to how trustworthy that environment has proven itself to be. Which means the more useful intervention was never teach kids more willpower. It's building environments, at home and at school, where promises to children are reliably kept so that waiting becomes the rational choice instead of a gamble. If you're noticing the pattern by now, a famous psychology finding, a much messier reality once you run the numbers properly, and a lesson that's more specific and more useful than the myth, that's this whole series. Next time on the Study Files, we're looking at the Rosenhan experiment, the study where researchers got themselves committed to psychiatric hospitals to prove a point, and a decades-later investigation that found the whole thing might not have happened quite the way it was reported. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and let me know in the comments, do you think you'd have waited for the second marshmallow?